Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Max Verstappen's team well positioned going into the 24 hours of Nurburgring tomorrow. Lots of updates on that front, but also what is going on exactly at Ferrari. Big reports emerged the other day that they've done something pretty radical with their engine this year, which has its benefits, but certainly has its downsides as well, especially in terms of the potential upside from the Adduo benefit they expect to receive. New reports emerging that maybe that's not the case at all. That could be even better when the Adduo comes into effect. N24, your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Thanks for all the support lately. This was 10 years ago today, the 15th of May 2016, the Brosades farewell, if you want to put it that way. And of course, Max Verstappen went on to famously win that race. And pretty much 10 years later, there was a chance he wins another big race tomorrow, as we'll get into here in a second. Although it's far from a guarantee, right? This is a very competitive race, and a lot of things have to go your way to win a 24-hour race. This was Max Verstappen, though, and his team on track today. So Lucas Auer, N24, and of course Max Verstappen behind the wheel of the AMG number 3 Mercedes. This was, I thought, a pretty phenomenal shot that I might have to throw on the thumbnail from last night when Max was getting some running in car number 3 in the wet conditions at the Nordschleife. So it's all been going on. Today was top qualifying to determine the order. Max is looking to become the first driver since Lauda to win, basically win the World Championship as well. There's been a number of drivers. I think there's been about 11 or 12 drivers who have had Formula 1 experience that have also won the 24 hours of the Nurburgring. One of which, actually, I guess he doesn't count really, but one of which I guess you could consider to be Bernd Mailander, who won it, I think, in 2000. Of course, he's been the Formula 1 safety car driver for some time, but Lauda did so. Verstappen is looking to do so this time, and whether he achieves it tomorrow or not, I think it's pretty likely that he does it at some point, because I don't think Max wants to stop racing GT3 anytime soon. The qualifying for this is pretty weird in a way. You have to get through to, I guess in IndyCar, it'd kind of like be the Firestone 5 shootout. Basically, they call it a shootout at the end, whatever it's called. It's American motorsports, so everything has to be sponsored, obviously. Bit different at the Nürburgring, but you have to make it through to top qualifying 3. That's when you can secure the real top spots on the grid. So they put Verstappen in the car for the second qualifying session, effectively to try and make sure that they made it. Look, Max is obviously phenomenal, but so are his teammates. So Auer got the car into Q2, effectively. Max got the car through to Q3, and then N24 took over in the final part of qualifying, and it was a great qualifying session here. It was super competitive, and in the end it was the 2 Lamborghinis that finished first and second. Well, there are 3 Lamborghinis. The other Lambo was down in 7th in the end. I say down in 7th, he was 1.1 seconds behind, and that, or down in 6th actually, that was the car number 7. But you can see here the 2 Lambos, and then a very familiar name from our recent Max Verstappen Nürburgring discussions, Christopher Haase in the Audi. He was 3rd in the end with a fantastic lap at the end, 8 tenths, and again, 8 tenths might sound like a lot, but these laps are 8 minutes, 11 seconds long. So Haase was 3rd, N24 in the Verstappen number 3 Mercedes was 4th, just 200ths behind Haase. So you can't get away from number 3, number 16. Doesn't matter whether it's Max Verstappen or it's Charles Leclerc. It appears that if you put a number 3 and a number 16 next to each other, Max and Haase will be going at it again. That is very likely. As you can tell here, given that these are 8-minute laps, these are very close times across the board, and that has something to do with balance of performance, as we'll discuss here in just a second, because for all the talk about, oh, Formula 1 has been so artificial this year, or whatever you want to say, BOP, it's still difficult for me to exactly wrap my head around the artificial nature of it, but I guess we'll just discuss it a little bit because it is very relevant to the competitive picture. The Mercedes is clearly a very good car, but it is carrying a lot more weight than its rivals because it's so good, and there's other things they tweak around as well. Now, I'm expecting, we'll see if they actually do this or not, because this is not a World Endurance Championship Series. The way that WEC works is they decide balance of performance going into the event, as I understand, whereas at the N24, they can kind of do what they want, and they can potentially change it between quali and the race, which we'll see if they decide to do that. But the point is that there's a load of things they can tweak here. The Porsche and the Ford ahead of top qualifying had one of their restrictors changed slightly. The McLaren had less turbo boost at this RPM, but they change it between the other RPM numbers, so it's all very complex. You can actually look at, I'll link this down below if you guys are interested. This is today's announcement basically from the Nurburgring, and they describe what they've done. So you can see the cars here, right? You've got the AMG, you've got the R8, right? The Audi, the McLaren, the Huracan, of course, that's the Lambo, and you can see the weight figures, right? So this is the minimum weight, it's kind of the big one here. There's also fuel load, which is very relevant, but you can see the minimum weight on the Mercedes is 1,355 kilos. On the Huracan, that's 25 kg lower, and in the Audi, I think the Audi is 30 kg lower than the Mercedes. So that's how they try to balance this. And on some level, it makes sense because, okay, imagine the Mercedes could also be much lower in terms of weight. It's probably the best car, and they would probably dominate, right? This has been the talk at Le Mans the last couple of years when Ferrari have been very good, because the idea of balance of performance is to create a very close competitive picture, which is what it appears to have done, right? I mean, you look at those qualifying laps, very, very competitive. And it's unlikely that somebody's just going to run away with the race. It's also difficult to say how that looks in qualifying compared to the race. People are expecting the BMW to make good progress in race conditions. I guess we'll see. But it's still, you got to wrap your head around it a little bit, because it's like, yeah, this is good for equalizing the playing field, but also it does mean that some cars are getting artificially penalized, as it were. But that is simply the nature of the beast. So Max Verstappen is a happy man for sure. They qualified well. I mean, obviously for a 24-hour race, the qualifying position is not massively relevant. What is relevant is showing you've at least got pace in the right ballpark and being in the conversation. That's where Max and his teammates have been, and they go into a pretty solid position tomorrow. Of course, as I say, we're expecting maybe more Haas versus Verstappen battles on track. But yeah, over 24 hours with weather conditions uncertain and with a serious night shift to be done as well, very much all can happen for the remainder of the weekends. And Max gave a few thoughts on this and said, I don't need to be only a Formula 1 driver. All the big endurance races I want to do, it's something that when I was a kid, my dad was doing them. I can also do other things. I've done this already for a while, achieved everything I want to achieve. So that's why I want to explore other things, and I don't want to do that when I'm 40. Now's the perfect age to do it. I'm not racing a Formula 1 car in the sim, but it's like GT cars. So it's also a different driving technique. It keeps me ready to go because I'm spending a lot of time also then on the setup. So I'm sure Red Bull are thinking, come on, Max, can you not maybe spend a bit more time on the RB22? But look, if this is what keeps Max happy, that is how it is going to be. This is the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal. This is the setup for this year. So we actually have confirmed the locations of the overtake detection mode. So there's no more DRS, but this is where if you are within a second on the entry to turn 13, you then get activation of overtake mode for the rest of the lap. And there is a conversation that, as much as the regulations are very complicated, I'm not a big fan of them, neither are many of you guys, they might have done this bit quite well. The overtake mode, it's still gimmicky, right? But DRS was gimmicky. But it's the same type of idea. Effectively what it does is it allows the driver behind, if they're within a second, to recharge more, an extra half a megajoule they can recharge over the course of the lap, and they can deploy more at the top speeds. So this is the version of DRS effectively that we have nowadays, because still you've got to wrap your head around it a little bit, that DRS used to be the flap is opening on the car, the flap still opens, but that's actually nothing to do with overtaking anymore. That's just a consequence of the Frankenstein engines. The overtake mode is only a 1 per lap thing, but if you're within a second, that has proved, I think, so far to kind of be enough to stay there. It's a little bit difficult to determine how the dirty air is really affecting these cars so far. In Miami, I think we got our first glimpse that, yeah, dirty air is still a problem. It's always going to be a problem. It depends on the circuit. But it appears that this overtake mode is maybe quite well balanced. You know, I'm not going to give Formula 1 a huge amount of credit here, but it does feel like watching the first few Grand Prix that if a driver is within a second, the extra recharge and the extra deployment is marginal, but it's enough to keep them there and give them the opportunity to kind of counteract the effect of the dirty air and give them a chance to go for the overtake. It doesn't appear that the overtake is way too powerful or way underpowered. They might have got this one about right, but it's probably still slightly too early to tell. Regardless, these are the DRS zones, as it used to be known, now straight line mode, so I've got to make sure that's very clear. But there are 3 straight modes on the track. They are pretty much where you would expect them to be. On the Sector 2 run between Turn 7 Turn 8, of course, you've got that great 8-9 chicane where George Russell crashed a couple of years ago. That should still be a great corner, but again, these regulations, they neutered, is it Turn 8, Turn 9 as well, or Turn 9, Turn 10 in Australia, so hopefully that's not the case this time. You'll also note that the DRS zone definitely starts, or the straight line mode, starts earlier than DRS did, so right after what they technically call Turn 11, out of the big hairpin here, that's not really a corner, but it's in the wet, it actually does take a bit of care, so whatever, it's a corner. But DRS, straight line mode, is activated immediately after that, whereas it used to be much further down the straight, so that is relevant. It will keep the cars as much as possible with enough juice in the tank, but as it were, in the battery, and the same kind of story in the run down to Turn 1 as well. So that is the Montreal Grand Prix coming up this weekend. Let's get into the Ferrari stuff. Just before that, we talked yesterday that this man, Jason Somerville, might be on his way to Alpine, and well, kind of not out of nowhere, because we talked about it yesterday, but I think when you hear rumours like this, you're kind of expecting, oh, maybe in 3 weeks we might hear an announcement about that. But no, Alpine just confirmed it today. They put a picture of him out there with the Alpine, and they said, yeah, Jason Somerville's joining us as our assistant technical director, and he's joining with immediate effect with no gardening leave at all. So, like, he was a main architect of these 2026 regs, but he's just joining Alpine with immediate effect, and they've announced it today. So, kind of surprising, I don't know. It's not massively shocking, but still one of those things that you don't necessarily expect to be quite so blatant, maybe, in what they're trying to achieve here. Now, Zach Brown also wants to shut down some blatant attempts, it seems, by Mercedes to get 2 Formula 1 teams. We discussed this in more detail yesterday, so I'm not going to go into the weeds of it, but effectively, there's a 24% stake up for grabs in Alpine. Christian Horner is interested in buying it. Mercedes, however, are the favourites because they want to replicate the Red Bull AB concept. Zach Brown doesn't like the sound of that, and I think he's bang on the money, right? Like, I'm all in favour of banning the possibility of owning multiple Formula 1 teams, certainly in the current state. Obviously, it's had its place. I don't think that it should be a thing anymore. I'm on board with Zach Brown on this. You guys may disagree, but yeah, Zach Brown's been pretty adamant, and apparently he actually wrote a letter. So there's clearly a belief that this is going to happen, or is very close to happening, or it's like Toto's going to buy Alpine, effectively, or, well, Mercedes are going to, but of course Toto will be a part of it. So apparently Zach Brown, on the back of all this, and seeing this develop in the way that it has written a letter to Ben Sulayem and said, look, we've got to eliminate any additional alliances, whether through ownership, strategic participation, or any other equivalent form of control or influence. We must work together quickly to initiate the process of dismantling those already established in order to ensure that the future integrity of this sport is not compromised. Now, look, is Zach doing this for competitive interest of his own team because McLaren don't own 2 teams? If McLaren did own 2 teams, would he be sending this letter? I'm sure that he wouldn't, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he is wrong. Again, it is a matter of perspective. However, let's talk about Ferrari. So a couple of days ago, we talked about this interesting rumour as to exactly why Ferrari, as we believe, had spent the off-season designing an engine with steel cylinder heads rather than the lighter aluminium. Now, the rumour emerged a couple of days ago that Ferrari have made a very radical development with their engine, and they are running it with a very hot air intake temperature. So there was a couple of reports circulating around this that effectively, instead of using the aero of the car as fundamentally a packaging for large radiators and a serious cooling setup, Ferrari decided, actually, we are going to run our engine an awful lot hotter than standard. Instead of having intake temperatures at more like 70, we're talking maybe 100 plus, with the consequence of sacrificing peak power, right? Because if the temperature of the air is too high, its density is lower, it won't produce the same result from the fuel in terms of the quality of the combustion, and you're sacrificing peak power, but you can gain by producing less residual heat, as they describe here. It also means you need smaller radiators, you can have smaller side pods, you can have better overall aero, and there was a feeling that this is why they had done this, because as a consequence they would sacrifice some engine performance, but they would also potentially gain in terms of their aerodynamic potential, which is maybe to an extent what we've seen. The downside here, though, is that clearly, if this is true, the aero benefits that they are getting isn't enough to overcome the engine deficit. And as we talked about, the theory went that the engine deficit here is significant, and it's overcomable with the Adduo, the additional development upgrade opportunities they expect to get confirmed after Montreal. But it's not going to be enough, because from a physics perspective, they would be unable to match Mercedes however much Adduo they get, right? So the feeling is, oh, well, maybe they can close the gap with the Adduo, but they won't be able to close it enough. However, some other reporting has now emerged on this. There was an article here from Formula Technica that says, as far as they're concerned, this simply is not the case, and they describe how basically the thermodynamics of achieving what this report suggests is simply not possible. It is a shame that we are faced with a sensational, almost science fiction-like theory that flies in the face of the fundamentals of technology behind the creation of an ICE for today's Formula 1. Introducing air at 100 degrees into the combustion chambers would result in a lethal loss of horsepower, far greater than previously thought, and maybe far greater than suggested in those articles, because, you know, they were talking about this would lose you 10 to 15 horsepower. This author suggests it would be an awful lot more than that, and even with the steel cylinder heads, you wouldn't be able to compress the air to the extent that you would need to counteract those problems. So, you know, they basically describe how thermodynamically this is impossible, at least according to this author. Now, like, maybe Ferrari have done something absolutely revolutionary, and it's, like, impossible to, they've somehow broken the laws of physics, I don't know. Or there's something else going on here, right? They're obviously waiting for the Adduo. Basically, he describes how it's more likely that they've just produced a power unit which is kind of weak, and this is obviously not good, but maybe there's other reasons why they're struggling. There's also talk about the back pressure from the flick tail mode, the FTM, the blown diffuser at the back of the car, the airflow from that, because it adds additional pressure behind the exhaust. It actually reduces the potential of the engine by 7 horsepower, as it was being described. So this is good or bad, depending on your opinion. Whatever you think the conclusion is, whether you believe that they have done this 100-degree air theory, although, as the author says, this is a hypothesis lacking any scientific rigor. So yeah, and this is that flick tail mode, by the way, behind the exhaust there, with some level of back pressure that is limiting the power of the engine. But the benefit of this story, if this is true, that indeed Ferrari's engine isn't as radical as we maybe thought a couple of days ago, is that actually the limit maybe is where Mercedes are, right? So if they haven't done this, then the conclusion would be, well, they've simply done a better job with their aero than anybody else has, and their engine actually can get to where Mercedes is with a good helping of the Adduo benefit, rather than being limited by the physics of what they have tried to achieve. So what the reality is, we don't really know. I'm sure we might find out in the relatively near future. More articles may be written on this, I imagine, in due course. So very much tweet your thoughts in a comment. Just one final thing, Mark Hughes put this together here. He looked at all the qualifying sessions he can find representative so far. He's clearly not figured out how to take a screenshot yet, so he's taken a picture with his phone, which I thought was pretty funny. But it is interesting to look at this, looking at all the qualifying sessions so far. I think the key takeaways really are, first of all, Norris and Piastri almost absolutely identical in terms of average lap times. Leclerc-Hamilton, there's a 10th in it. Verstappen still maintains that kind of scary gap over his teammates. I think the two standouts here really are Gasly and probably Behrman. You know, Gasly averaging a 129.1. That's 5 tenths ahead of 4.5 tenths ahead of Colapinto based on the averages. Still early days. There's not a lot of data here, but, you know, we get a decent glimpse of what the cars are capable of. And then probably Behrman, right? You know, for Behrman to be, again, near enough 3 tenths on average ahead of Ocon continues to be, I think, extremely impressive. And, yeah, then you've got the Aston Martins and then Bottas and Perez. I think there's been talk about where Bottas and Perez lie, just because it's a conversation around, well, Bottas was Hamilton's teammate during that famous era, Perez with Verstappen's teammate in that famous era. So, who's better, right? And so far it's, well, obviously, first of all, this is 2026. We're talking about 2021. Arguably, that some of those drivers will change in the quality of their racing over time, but also for now it's pretty inconclusive. They look pretty much neck and neck. But very much on Twitter your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.